The Edmonton Oilers did quite a bit of work this offseason to overhaul their middle six. What does Jeff Skinner bring to the table entering his 15th NHL season?
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everybody who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So today's episode, very straightforward. We're going to do very similarly to what we did with Ty Emberson a few weeks ago, where we walk through the evolutions, the steps of his career so far, the context, how he's been used, who he's played with, to kind of give you an expectation, to give you an understanding of what you can realistically expect from Jeff Skinner. Now, we all are very familiar with Jeff Skinner. I'm going to assume that if you are taking time out of your day to listen to an Edmonton Oilers podcast, you're more than just the average hockey fan. You are knowledgeable about teams other than the Oilers. You care about what's going on in the league on a macro level all around us. And you're familiar with Jeff Skinner. You know he won the Calder. You know he was with Carolina forever. You know he went to Buffalo. You know that this is a guy who has had a few different stops at a few different places, that he has yet to play in an NHL playoff game going into his 15th season in the NHL. And the Oilers are going to look to try and break that streak this season. So we're going to break it down in our traditional three segments, the way we do all of our player evaluations. We start with context, then we go to the shooting metrics, the underlying numbers, then our final segment, we'll take a peek at the transition stats, and we'll try and give our best guess as to what Jeff Skinner is going to look like on the Edmonton Oilers in 2024-2025. So let's start with the most straightforward and simple outlook. Jeff Skinner overpaid. We all agree that that contract that the Buffalo Sabres gave Jeff Skinner when they did 8 years, $9 million per year was an overpay. When you are a team like the Sabres, like the Senators, like the Blue Jackets, when you are a team that does not have a history of success, that maybe isn't in the best period at the current moment, not very competitive, not very successful, not a lot of talent, you're going to have to pay a little bit more than you probably would to get players to want to stay if you're a free agent, or in this case, if you're Jeff Skinner, you are going to overpay a Jeff Skinner if you're the Sabres, because you want to take steps forward. And one of the most direct ways you as a front office and an ownership can show your fan base and show the public that you are committed to trying to get better is to spend money. It doesn't necessarily guarantee it's going to work, but the Sabres' willingness to spend money hasn't really been a question under the Pegula family. You know, they spent that money on Jeff Skinner. A couple of years ago, they brought in Taylor Hall on that one-year deal before eventually trading him to the Bruins at the deadline that season. There is some semblance of a plan. The issue is the Sabres have yet to really iron out what it actually takes to build a successful team. So last year on a mediocre Sabres team, the Sabres weren't awful last year like they had been in previous seasons, but they weren't particularly good, the Sabres last year. There wasn't a lot to be excited about. Like even 2 years ago when Tage Thompson had the 50-goal season, at least even though the results weren't there, there was something to be excited about. There was something enjoyable. Last year, that wasn't there. Thompson hurt his knee, missed quite a bit of time last year. He's coming off of an okay season, 31 going into age 32, 24 goals, 22 assists. But the big thing, and I know I'm talking more about narratives and mindset in this first segment, but in understanding the context, how we put together a player profile, understanding that as a talented player on a bad team, your numbers are going to take a certain tenor. They're going to naturally trend in a certain direction just because of the nature of hockey. You are so dependent on the environment that it takes a really good player to outperform their environment. And one of the ways you can do that is stuff we're going to talk about later, the transition stats, that type of thing. But at the very least, what makes Jeff Skinner who he is as a player, the skating and the shooting. Anything else, you're asking for probably a little bit too much. And I think that's reasonable for, especially at this point in his career, for people to say, well, we know his defense isn't good. And that's fair. That is entirely fair. I think that's perfectly reasonable. But the caveat to that is, can he outcreate and outchance the defensive deficiencies? And that is a calculated risk that teams are going to need to take at points with certain players that have overly specialized skill sets. You've heard me talk a lot about that over the course of the offseason, this idea of everybody who gets to the NHL has something to offer. It's simply a matter of, does the team put that player in a position to maximize what they're good at? In Buffalo, Jeff Skinner was getting chances to play with good players. His most common line mates last year included Tage Thompson. His most common line mates last year were Tage Thompson, Alex Tuch, Casey Middlestat before he got traded, and Jay Petekara. Jeff Skinner played the 7th most minutes in average time on ice, and he played the 4th most minutes of any forward on the entire team last year. He got deployed the most with Rasmus Dahlin, who's one of the best defensemen in the entire world. So the Sabres, realizing that they were not a great defensive team, assembled what we would colloquially call a hero line. We put our best 3 forwards all on one line and say, we're going to do whatever we can to maximize it. And Jeff Skinner doesn't necessarily fit with Tuch and Thompson in terms of best players, because you could throw Jack Quinn, you could throw Dylan Cousins, but you got to worry about positions. But for the purposes of this mindset, how we're talking about Jeff, think about it like this. The Sabres know Jeff Skinner has defensive deficiencies. They know he's not going to be able to help them out defensively. So they say, we're going to put him with our best offensive forward in Tage Thompson and one of our best forwards in Alex Tuch. And we're going to tell them offense, 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 offense. We are going to outscore our defensive issues. And whether it's Pekka Luukkonen or whether it's Devin Levy, we are going to be okay in net. And that's going to allow us to feel comfortable in this chance trading environment where we go back and forth. And if we concede, that's okay, because if we put those guys back out there, they're going to have a good chance to score again. And when we talk about the underlying results in the next segment, you're going to see that the Sabres were able to largely outscore and outchance their problems last year through offense when Skinner was on the ice. And it is a dangerous proposition to try and outscore your problems. A lot of teams try to do it, and it's just not feasible for the vast majority of teams because they don't have the talent necessary to create the amount of offense to offset the defense they're giving away. The most obvious example I can think of last year, one of the best lines in the entire league was Artemi Panarin, Alexi Lafreniere, and Vinny Trocheck. That trio, it was all offense. They gave away a lot of the chances back at the other end defensively, but with Shesterkin in net, they felt reasonably okay playing chance trade back and forth and said, okay, we're not great defensively, but if we're out there, we're in the offensive zone, we're going to buy ourselves time. We're going to be in the offensive zone. We're going to put pressure on the other team. We're going to score more goals than we're going to concede, even if the other team does have the puck a little bit more than us, or they catch us in transition because all 3 of our guys are up close to the net and it creates an odd man rush going back the other way. There are ways to, I don't want to call it scheme around because that's more of a football way of describing it, but there are ways to deploy around player shortcomings, and it will be incumbent upon Chris Knobloch to do that. Coming up next in the next segment of Locked On Oilers, we're going to dive under the hood to Jeff Skinner's numbers in Edmonton. We're going to dive under the hood into Jeff Skinner's numbers in Buffalo last season. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, but we have something a little different for you now. Through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon at a market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. I know I was enthralled with week 1 of the NFL season. Texans, Colts lived up to the hype. Dolphins, Jaguars was a very good game. My Giants got slaughtered. Tonight, if you were so interested on this Monday, the 49ers are 4.5-point favorites at home against the returning Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets. Thursday night football, Bills, Dolphins. The Dolphins giving 2.5 points to the Bills at home in Miami. I will probably ride with Josh Allen, who put together a sublime second half performance in Western New York on Sunday afternoon to lead the Bills back from a 17-3 deficit. Josh Allen had 3 pass attempts at halftime, and the Bills were able to come storming back. So if you want to get in on the action, visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out today, listening to Locked On Oilers as their first listen of the day. Now, go check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link to Locked On NHL in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, when we talk about results, I think it's important that we talk about it in 2 categories. That there are the underlying results, which are things like shots on goal, expected goals, high danger chances. And then there are on-ice results, which are goals, assists. That's it. There are 2 tiers to this profile, to building out how a player performs and understanding how they perform. And just because a player has good underlying results does not necessarily mean they are going to be good at 5-on-5, and vice versa. Just because a player has bad underlying results doesn't mean you can't find a way to make them useful at 5-on-5. And this is really one of the conundrums within hockey decision-making right now, that we see things with our own 2 eyes. We see players continually get pinned in their own zone, can't win the puck, can't force a turnover, can't go from defense to offense quickly. And because of that, they are on the ice for more scoring chances against. And typically, when you're on the ice for more chances against, you are going to eventually concede more goals than you are going to create. Now, as we discussed in the first segment, there are workarounds for this. If you have a great goalie like the Rangers or like the Sabres, this was a bit of a hot take last season when we were talking about awards, but I was in on Pekka Luukkonen as a top 5 for the Vezina because he was great down the stretch for the Sabres. And I know the Sabres went into last year expecting Devin Levy to kind of run with it as their presumptive starter of the future. And instead, Levy got hurt because he was just too much of a workload too early in the season. And instead, it took a little while for Pekka Luukkonen to kind of take the starter's reins in Buffalo, but he was a quality goaltender for them at times. So if you're going to concede a lot of chances against as part of your team's overlying strategy, if you've got the great goalie, you might be able to make that work. And look, I can understand, and I think you should too, the Oilers' expectations of Jeff Skinner are going to be very different from the Sabres' expectation for Jeff Skinner. I don't think Jeff Skinner is going to start the year playing with Connor McDavid and Zach Hyman. He could. I just don't think he will. I think you are going to see a little bit of mixing and matching throughout the Oilers' entire top 9. I think you're going to see points where it's Arvidsson, where it's Skinner, where it's Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and they're going to be moving pieces around until they find the best permutation of a top 9, because the Oilers did have quite a bit of roster turnover. You lose a Holloway, you lose a Fogle, you lose a McLeod, you bring in 3 new guys, and you should be reasonably optimistic for Skinner, Arvidsson, Savoie. But I do think you also need to think in terms of what we're expecting. And we're going to talk about counting stats, projections, trying to understand. But when we talk about Jeff Skinner, the player, 211 shots on goal, I can just come out and tell you he's not going to have that many shots on goal this upcoming season. He's not going to play enough minutes to generate 211 shots on goal. If we were to look at it in comparison to last year, the Oilers overall had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They had 6 players clear the 200 shots on goal mark. Draisaitl, Evander Kane, Evan Bouchard, which that's an extreme outlier to have a defenseman with that many. But Hyman had 290 shots on goal, McDavid 263, Bouchard and Evander Kane both had 220, Draisaitl 217, and Warren Fogle 201. Now, if you want to say that Jeff Skinner is going to take the Evander Kane role and that's going to allow him to have that much volume, okay. But I do think you should understand that a lot of Skinner's shots on goal attempt were coming on the power play last year for Buffalo, that a lot of Skinner's chance creation is not his own. He is not making space for himself. He is getting to a spot and then he's waiting for the puck. When we talk about the underlying numbers, so he's 88th percentile last year of shots on goal. That's great. He's 83rd percentile of goals. That's also great. For the entire season, when Jeff Skinner was on the ice, the Sabres had 993 scoring chances for, 943 chances against. At 5-on-5, the Sabres outscored opponents 47-38 when Jeff Skinner was on the ice. The Sabres generated 42.3 expected goals. They conceded 47.4 expected goals. And this is what's really kind of glaring. The Sabres generated 163 high danger scoring chances, and they conceded 215 high danger chances. The Sabres had a 9.18 shooting percentage, so 9.18, and they had a 9.18 save percentage. So when you put all of that together, that paints a picture kind of consistent with what we've been talking about. The Sabres are out there. They are generating offense. They are not generating particularly dangerous offense, being that they're out high danger and out expected goals. But because Tuch, because Tage Thompson, because Jeff Skinner are all above average NHL shooters, they're going to be able to outshoot the results. You drop that in with some above average at goaltending, which we discussed, 9.18, and a 9.18 save percentage is good. 918 is well above average. It's almost at 920, which would be about almost, I want to say that would be a third quartile save percentage, but I need to go and look and do the math for last season in particular. But when you have strong goaltending and strong shooting talent, you don't necessarily need to win your scoring chance battle. We talk about this a lot, that the scoring chances, you can outdo volume. You know, if the other team has more total chances, but you have more high danger, you can work around that. The Sabres, of course, didn't. It was the other way around. They had more chances. They conceded more danger and more quality. But because of the shooting talent of those three guys, they were able to kind of facsimile their way along. They were able to outscore their opponents, even though the other team was generating more dangerous looks because of their shooting talent. And I don't know necessarily if the Oilers are going to be in a position to do something similar, but if anyone was, it would be the Oilers. And then real quick, 12% higher expected goals per 60 above league average when Skinner was on the ice off in the offensive zone. And they were also 11% below average in the defensive zone, meaning that the Sabres concede a lot, but that 12 versus 11, that 1%, that's enough, man. Jeff Skinner is not going to be asked to carry the load here. We're all in agreement that Jeff Skinner is here to kind of be a supplementary figure. He is here to ride shotgun with a Skinner, ride shotgun with a Draisaitl, with a McDavid, maybe even with an Adam Henrique at points this season if the Oilers feel like they need more depth scoring. But the recipe for Jeff Skinner to be an effective Oiler is relatively straightforward. It's not that dissimilar to what he did as a Sabre last year. And we are going to talk all about that coming up in our final segment of Locked On Oilers, so be sure to stick around. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. We are getting there. Right before I got on to record, I saw a video of Oilers participating in a skate. It's not the formal captain skate, but a couple of Oilers back in Alberta skating together. We're getting there. We're a few weeks away from training camp, testing. Then soon enough, we'll be talking about preseason games. We'll be talking about whether or not any of the PTO candidates out there are going to get an invite, whether it's Justin Schultz or Kevin Shattenkirk or it's Travis Dermott. There are guys out there that might be able to fit that role. But as far as content, I am going to do my best to keep this fresh, to keep doing dives like this on individual players, because you guys seem to like this. The Ty Emberson video got a lot of got a lot of views on YouTube. It got a lot of people interested in what you can do. And these player evaluations are a strong way to put together a profile of a team. And one thing, and I'm going to talk about this later today on Liberty Blue, and Hunter Hodes and I are going to talk about this on Thursday on Locked On NHL. You are forecasting a certain outlook for your team. You have a bunch of range of outcomes ranging from missing the playoffs, picking first overall, to winning the Stanley Cup. And the Oilers are somewhere on that plot. They are definitely closer to winning the Stanley Cup than they are picking first overall. Because of that, you're going to need to have certain players reach certain thresholds. And at this point in his NHL career, we can think about Jeff Skinner as a supporting character. You know, he's Martin Sheen in Departed, where he's the fifth or sixth lead. He's not doing everything. He's not DiCaprio. He's not Matt Damon. He's not even Wahlberg. He's here. He's not even Alec Baldwin. He is here for one specific role, and he is going to get to spots. He's going to receive passes from Leon Draisaitl, and he's going to fling them at the net. And you heard me talk about this a lot over the course of the summer, that Jeff Skinner is a little bit more of what the Oilers already had, where he's trading chances back and forth, creating off of the rush. Jeff Skinner does carry the puck in at a very high rate, which is useful. That way, if he does it, Draisaitl doesn't have to do it, and it opens up doors for chance creation. And that's really one of the keys to getting to that next level as a hockey team, is the other team can't be sitting on something. And the Oilers unlocked this with Zach Hyman, who had a solid NHL career going for him in Toronto, but you put him next to the best player in the world, who's going to draw a ton of attention, and Zach Hyman's going to go from being a pretty good hockey player to scoring 50 goals. I don't think Jeff Skinner is ever going to score 50 goals again in the NHL. I just think he's too old. I don't think he's going to put the type of season together to make that happen. He absolutely can hit 25, 30 goals relatively easily. He hit 24 last year on a pretty bad Sabres team. I think if he's riding shotgun with Draisaitl, the two of them as strong puck carriers, they're going to be able to create space for each other. And Leon, we all know Leon's a great shooter, but when Leon is locked in and he's got that 8,000 IQ play of, all right, if I get to this exact spot and put this pass in this exact spot, that's going to allow this guy to put that in. And then I'm going to be able to follow up for a second chance. And when we talk about Jeff Skinner and you look at the transition stats, the thing that jumps out is that Jeff is not going to help other guys create offense. And this is what we talk about when we say one-dimensional. Skinner is a really good shooter. He's an above-average shooter for his entire career. Even now, he's not the skater he used to be. If you look at the NHL Edge, what's the word I'm looking for? The physics, the data tracking, the manual tracking the NHL does, where they have a chip in all the players' equipment and it tracks their speed, the distance they cover, where they are on the ice, that type of thing. That's where all these chance creation numbers come from, is the data that those chips report back to the league, and the league makes that data available, and then people aggregate that data into applicable data sets. But Skinner's below 50th percentile in top skating speed now. Once upon a time, he was amongst the best skaters in the world. But his shot is still in the 80s in terms of speed. He's still got an above average shot that tracks out both in terms of speed and in terms of goals. We talked about it before. He was in the 80-something percentile of goals last year. And that, with a great playmaker like Draisaitl, opens up doors. And the fact that Skinner knows he's coming here as that Martin Sheen character, he's going to be more amicable to playing in different spots in the lineup. And that's where you can start to do interesting things where, all right, we're getting plenty of offense from Connor and from Zach Hyman. Are we going to put Ryan Nugent-Hopkins with Draisaitl and then slap Skinner on the other wing? That way we have all three of those guys who are dangerous in different ways. Are we going to put him on the third line with Adam Henrique, and we're really going to deepen, elongate our lineup? We're going to play Arvidsson in the top six, and we're going to play Nuge in the top six, and that gives us all these opportunities. Are we going to put Skinner with Savoie with Adam Henrique, and we're going to go for an all-offense third line? That's what's tantalizing about the opportunity the Oilers have in front of them. The fact that they have so many different guys. And look, I've been critical of the fact that a lot of these guys have similar skill sets. They're more offense-based forwards than defense-based forwards. But if you can legitimately outscore your problems the way the Oilers are going to probably try to this season, with their uncertainty on the back end and with the volatility of the goaltending position, Jeff Skinner's the type of guy you take a shot on. You know, this is a guy who, going into his 15th season, has yet to be in an NHL playoff game. This is somebody who clearly knows it's not over yet, but we're winding down. And in an ideal world, I think the Oilers get 30 goals out of Skinner. I think Skinner parlays that into a 2 or a 3 year deal with a less competitive team that's maybe a tier or two down from the Oilers, gets a little bit more long-term financial security, gets an opportunity to chase a Stanley Cup for 1 year and play with Draisaitl and or McDavid, probably both at varying points of the season. And when you are at this stage of your career like Skinner, it's really about what motivates you at this point. It can't really be about the money anymore because Jeff Skinner's made a ton of money. It can't really be about the stats because Jeff Skinner's got 1,000 games played. He's put together a really solid NHL career as an above average player for a decade and a half. At this point, it's about love of the game and trying to get your name on the cup. And when you only might get 2-3 cracks at it, like Skinner is down the road here. And that's the other thing, if Skinner really wants to chase a Stanley Cup, he could keep doing these one-year deals with the Oilers in perpetuity until both sides say, okay, it's time to retire. Because the Oilers are going to need underpriced veteran talent to fill out their roster. And if Jeff Skinner wants a Stanley Cup, your best bet year over year is probably with the team that has 2 of the 7 best players in the world. And sure, you could say the Avalanche are in the same boat. You might be able to say the Rangers. You might be able to say the Panthers, whatever. The point is, this is a good marriage on paper. Translating that to actual on-ice results that work for the Oilers is a different story. But based on the type of player Skinner is, based on the players he's going to be deployed with, the opportunity for something really nice here, and not quite a late-stage renaissance, but if Skinner pots 50 points, he's 25, 30 goals, 15, 20 assists, for 3-something million that the Oilers got him for, you do that 100 times out of 100. The going rate I always say is $1 million per 10 points, $1.5 million per 10 goals. If Skinner gives them 30 goals at $1.5 million, that's already paid for. That's like $5.5 million right there. And Skinner's only coming in at 3. That's a good number that both parties can agree to. So I hope this episode illuminated what you can expect, what you think about Jeff Skinner at this stage of his respective NHL career. But that will do it for today's episode. So before we get out of here, if you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please throw the show a 5-star review. If you are watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell, get a notification whenever new content goes live. Leave me a comment. Let me know, how many goals do you think Jeff Skinner scores as an Edmonton Oiler this season? And before we get out of here, thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and a local insight on every team in the league. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.